December 14, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Snow falls in silence. The kind of silence that muffles even thought, turning the world into a cathedral of white where sound itself seems forbidden. Private First Class Michael Brennan crouches in a foxhole so shallow it barely deserves the name, his breath forming clouds that hang in the frozen air like accusation. His hands are wrapped in torn fabric strips, fingers blackened at the tips, the early signs of frostbite that every man here has learned to ignore. He is 22 years old, from a place called Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where winters are cold but never like this. Where cold means staying inside, lighting the stove, pulling a blanket close. Not this. Not cold that reaches inside your chest and wraps around your heart like wire. Not cold that turns your rifle barrel to ice, that makes your fingers refuse to bend, that transforms every breath into a small act of violence against your own lungs. The forest around him is silent except for the occasional crack of a distant tree branch giving way under the weight of ice. The Wehrmacht is out there somewhere. Everyone knows this. The Germans are always out there, invisible in the white, waiting. The 106th Infantry Division has been holding this sector for days now, spread thin along a front that stretches further than it should, defending positions with ammunition that grows scarcer by the hour. Brennan's wedding ring sits on his finger, too loose now. He has lost weight. They all have. The gold band catches what little light filters through the cloud cover, a circle of warmth in a world that has forgotten warmth exists. He turns it absently with his thumb, a habit born in the first weeks of marriage, continued through training, through the Atlantic crossing, through the march east. His wife's name is Catherine. He has not heard from her in 17 days. The last letter arrived crumpled and stained, passed through so many hands that the paper felt more like cloth. She had written about the apartment, about the neighbor's cat, about ordinary things that seemed impossible from here. She had signed it, "Forever yours," and he had traced those words with his finger until the ink smudged. That letter is folded inside his jacket now, pressed against his chest, growing brittle in the cold. In the foxhole next to his, Private Eddie Walsh sleeps sitting up, his head tilted back against frozen earth, mouth open. Walsh is from Brooklyn, talks incessantly about bagels and subway trains and a girl named Marie who may or may not be waiting for him. Brennan envies him the sleep. He himself has not slept properly in 4 days, just brief collapses into something darker than sleep, punctuated by sudden starts at sounds that might be movement or might be nothing. The forest deceives. Snow makes everything look closer than it is, turns distance into something unstable. A tree 50 yards away might as well be 5. Everything is white on white, shapes bleeding into other shapes. Brennan has learned to distrust his eyes, to rely instead on sound, on instinct, on the animal awareness that wakes you a second before something terrible happens. He checks his rifle again. The M1 Garand has served him well, never jammed, never failed, but in this cold metal becomes something else. It burns to touch with bare skin. He has seen men lose skin to their weapons, flesh tearing away when they grabbed a barrel too quickly. Everything here wants to hurt you. The cold, the Germans, the terrain, even your own equipment. The ring turns on his finger. It occurs to him that if he dies here, someone will have to remove it. Send it back to Catherine along with the form letter, the notification, the bureaucratic acknowledgement that he existed and then stopped existing. The thought is unbearable and also strangely common. Everyone thinks this way. Death is not abstract when you can see your breath freeze in the air. What they had been told about the Germans before deployment was clear, precise, delivered with the certainty that comes from propaganda well crafted. The enemy is fanatical, they were told. Trained from childhood to follow orders without question, to fight without mercy, to die before surrendering. They worship Hitler like a god. They execute prisoners. They burn villages. They are not like us. And some of this is true. Brennan has seen enough to know that war makes monsters of men, that the Wehrmacht soldiers he has encountered fight with a desperation that borders on madness. But he has also noticed small things. The German soldiers carry photographs too. Letters. They wear wedding rings. When they die, they bleed the same red. There is a contradiction here that no one discusses. The enemy is human and inhuman at once, deserving of death yet pitiable in death, monstrous in conception but ordinary in flesh. Brennan does not have the language to articulate this, but he feels it every time he sees a German body in the snow, limbs twisted at wrong angles, face frozen in the moment before impact. They could be us, he thinks. We could be them. The foxhole smells of damp wool, of unwashed bodies, of the metallic tang that comes from fear prolonged beyond endurance. They have been told to hold this position at all costs. The phrase, at all costs, has become meaningless through repetition, but its weight remains. It means die here if necessary. It means do not retreat. It means the forest is all there is, and all there will ever be. Brennan's sergeant is a man named Kowalski, a Polish immigrant with a face like carved stone and eyes that never seem to blink. Kowalski fought in North Africa, Sicily, France, and now here. He carries himself with the exhausted competence of someone who has survived too much to believe in luck. Yesterday, Kowalski had told them to check their ammunition, conserve their grenades, eat their rations slowly. Then he had added, almost as an afterthought, if you pray, pray now. The instruction had been delivered without emotion, but Brennan had heard what lay beneath it. Kowalski knows something. Everyone knows something. The Germans are massing. Intelligence reports speak of troop movements, of armor gathering in the east, of something large being prepared. But intelligence reports have been wrong before, and even when they are right, knowing does not change the cold or the fear or the way time moves differently in a foxhole. Brennan touches the ring again. Catherine had placed it on his finger in a church in Cedar Rapids on a Saturday afternoon in May, when the world was green and warm and infinite. She had cried, but they were good tears, tears of joy or relief or some emotion he had no name for. Her hands had trembled slightly as she slid the gold band onto his finger, and he had thought then that he had never loved anything as much as he loved her in that moment. Now, in the snow, that memory feels like it belongs to someone else. Some other Michael Brennan who lived in a world where churches existed and Saturdays were for weddings and tears meant joy. That man is gone. This man, this one in the frozen foxhole with black fingers and a rifle that barely works, this man is something new. Something war has made. December 14, 1944. A circle of gold that weighs almost nothing, Belgium, that costs maybe $30, snow falls that means everything. The kind of silence that muffles even thought. Turning the world into a cathedral of white where sound itself. These promises hang between them across an ocean. Private first class Michael Brennan crouches across the unbridgeable distance that barely deserves the name. His breath wonders if the ring hang in the frozen air like accusation. If objects can hold promises. His hands are wrapped in torn fabric metal can remember vows. Fingers blackened at the tips. The snow continues to fall. Of frostbite that every man here has stirs into his sleep. Murmurs something unintelligible. He is 22 years old. Settles from a place called Cedar Rapids, Brennan watches Iowa, him, where winters are cold but never like sleep is mercy here. Where cold means the only escape from the lighting the stove, from the knowledge that something is coming but not knowing when or from where. The waiting is worse that reaches inside your chest and wraps around your heart like condensed into minutes. Not cold that turns your rifle stretched across hours and makes your fingers refuse the only reality that transforms every breath into a small act of violence against your own lungs. Small, the forest around him is silent except for the occasional crack of a distant tree branch giving way under the weight of ice. Or the careful step of a boot trying to move out there somewhere. Or nothing at all. Everyone knows this. Brennan's hand tightens on his rifle. The Germans are always out there, invisible in the white, waiting. He listens with an intensity that makes his temples has been holding this sector for days now. Nothing, spread thin along the front that stretches further than watches the cloud of his breath dissipates with ammunition that grows scarcer by the hour. It turns wedding ring sits on his finger, silence into terror now, waiting into the only enemy that never sleeps. They all have. He wants to wake Walsh, to share the fear, catches to have someone else confirm that the sound was real or imaginary in a world that has forgotten but Walsh deserves the sleep. He turns it everyone deserves the sleep, a habit born in the first weeks of marriage, the light again, continued through training. He should take it off, he thinks, through the march east. Keep it safer. His wife's name is Catherine, stored in his pack. He has not heard from her in 17 days. Jewelry is a letter arrived crumpled and stained, something that can catch so many hands that identify you more like captured. Mark you if you die. She had written about the apartment, but he cannot bring himself to remove it. About ordinary things that seemed impossible. To take off the ring would be to admit something he cannot admit. She had signed it, forever yours, that he might not survive. And he had traced those words with his finger that until Catherine might receive a letter and a gold band. That letter is folded inside his jacket now. The Germans, pressed against his chest, believe in growing brittle in the cold. Fate. In the foxhole next to his, the idea that some man Eddie Walsh sleeps sitting others pass his head tilted back against frozen earth. Brennan does not believe this, or does not want to believe it, but in the foxhole all beliefs become subway trains and a girl named Marie who may or may not some men are chosen to survive. Brennan envies him the ring is proof. He himself surely the symbol of his promise has power. Just brief collapses into something darker than whatever force governs the universe will recognize sounds that might be movement or might be nothing. This is magical thinking, the forest and he knows it. But magical thinking is all that remains when rational thought offers nothing on statistics of death. A tree 50 yards away might as well be 5. He had never thought of forests as alive until this bleeding into other shapes. But here, in the Ardennes, Brennan has learned to distrust his eyes, to rely instead on sound, seems to whisper, on instinct, on the animal awareness itself that feels like a second before something terrible with intention. Everything is animate with menace. The M1 Garand has served him well, never jammed, Brennan remembers his father's advice, but in this cold metal becomes something else. His father had fought in the last war, to touch with the one they called great until this one made it merely men lose skin to their weapons. His father had stood on the porch and grabbed a barrel too quickly, had shaken his hand instead of embracing him, and had said simply, stay alert. The Germans, the trust your instinct, even your own equipment. Come home. The ring turns on imperative, as if willpower alone could navigate war. Here, someone will have to remove. But his father had come home. Send it back to Catherine along with the form letter, but home, the notification, the ring Brennan wears now had belonged to his father and then stopped existing. Passed down when his father died last year. The thought is unbearable, and also the Germans in 1918 had not. Everyone thinks this way. Catherine had worn it briefly. Death is not uncertain about the tradition, then accepted it as a gift from a man she would never meet. What they had been told about the Germans before the ring therefore carries two marriages, delivered with the certainty that comes from propaganda well who went to war. The enemy is stronger or weaker, they were told. Does history accumulated metal follow orders each wearer start fresh, to fight without remembering nothing, to die before surrendering? Brennan does not know. They worship Hitler like a god. He knows only that the ring has survived 2 wars prisoners, and that must mean something. They burn villages. The light is fading. They are not like us. Not much. The winter some of this is brief. Twilight arriving in mid-afternoon enough to know that war makes monsters of men. That the shadows deepen between the trees. Fight with a desperation that borders on a blue cast, luminous but he has also noticed small things. This is the dangerous hour. The German soldiers carry photographs harder to detect. Letters. The forest closes in. They wear wedding rings. Men make mistakes in the gathering dark. They bleed the same red. Kowalski appears suddenly. There is a contradiction here that no one discusses. Silence of a man who has learned that noise kills. And inhuman at once, deserving of death beside pitiable in death. His face barely visible beneath layers of scarf and flesh. His breath does not have the language to articulate. Somehow he has found coffee, but he feels it every time he sees a German body in the snow. They're coming. Twisted at Kowalski says quietly, face frozen in the moment before not impact. A question. They could be us, he thinks. When? We could Brennan asks. The foxhole smells of damp wool, tonight, of unwashed bodies, tomorrow, of the metallic tang that comes from fear prolonged beyond endurance. Sharp. They have been told to hold this position at all costs, carrying his knowledge like a burden too heavy to set down, has become meaningless. Brennan watches him disappear into the remains, then turns back to the forest. It means die here if necessary. The trees stand silent. It means do not retreat. They have seen wars before. The forest is all there is, and all there will ever be. They will see wars again. Brennan's sergeant is a man named who lives or dies beneath their branches, with a face like carved stone and eyes that never seem to blink. Or perhaps his finger feels in North Africa, Sicily, he twists it, France, feels and slide more easily than it should. He carries himself with the exhausted confidence of someone who has survived too much to believe in fall off on its own. Lost in the snow, Kowalski another told them to check their ammunition, conserve their grenades, he should tie it to something, their rations, secure it somehow. Then he had added, he does not, almost as an afterthought. Instead, if you pray, he makes a decision. The instruction had been delivered without emotion, finds him here in the shallow foxhole lay beneath it. He will remove the ring. Kowalski knows something. Give it to Walsh. Everyone knows something. Tell Walsh to send it home if he does not survive. The Germans are massing. The thought is both pragmatic and untrue movements of armor gathering in the ring is to prepare something large being prepared. But to lose it in intelligence reports have been disappear into the chaos, and even when they are right, worse. Knowing does not change this is the calculus of war or the way time moves, weighing types of loss against each other, choosing which tragedy is more acceptable. Catherine had placed it on his finger in a church that Cedar Rapids on a Saturday afternoon another piece of equipment when the world was green, another variable in the endless equation of survival. She had cried, but they were good tears. Closes his eyes of joy or relief or some emotion he had no name for. Tries to summon Catherine's face. Her hands had trembled slightly as she slid the gold band onto his finger. The memory is fading. Then that he had never loved anything as much as he loved her. He could recall every detail. The exact shade of her eyes, that memory feels like it belongs to someone else. The way her voice sounded when she said his name. Some other Michael Brennan who lived in a world where churches existed and Saturdays were for weddings and tears erases everything eventually. That man is gone. When he opens his eyes, this one in the frozen foxhole with black fingers and a rifle that barely works, but the quality of silence has shifted. Some waiting feeling has intensified. Something is moving out there. Not might be moving. Is moving. Every instinct Brennan possesses screams this truth. He nudges Walsh awake. Walsh jerks upright, eyes wide, hand reaching for his rifle before he is fully conscious. This is a reflex now. Sleep never goes deep enough to be true rest. What? Walsh whispers. Listen, Brennan says. They listen. The snow falls. The forest breathes. And somewhere, so faint it might be imagination, the sound of boots moving through snow. Many boots. Moving with purpose. The Germans are coming. And Michael Brennan, who is 22 years old and married and desperately wants to live, wraps his blackened fingers around his rifle and prepares to do what war demands. The ring catches the last light. A small circle of gold. A promise made in May. A lifetime ago. December 14, 1944. Not the gradual brightening that passes for sunrise in winter, but the first snow falls in silence. The moment when darkness becomes nearly dim muffles even thought, stops turning the world into shadow and starts being where sound itself seems forbidden. The moment when Private First Class Michael Brennan crouches in a foxhole so shallow it barely deserves the name. His breath forming clouds that hang in the frozen air like accusation. The whisper crunch of boots. His hands are wrapped in torn fabric strips, fingers black, the breathing of men moving the early signs of frostbite that every man here has learned to ignore. Then, like ghosts materializing from the white, from a place called Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where winters advancing through the trees in a line that seems to extend forever in both directions, lighting the stove, gray uniforms against gray dawn against white snow. Not this. They look like specters, cold that reaches inside your chest and wraps around your heart like wire. Fact. Not the firing begins somewhere down the line, a single shot that triggers a cascade of sound that transforms every breath into a small act of violence against your own lungs. Brennan's sight around him is silent except for the occasional crack of a distant tree branch giving way under the weight of ice and squeezes the trigger. The Wehrmacht is out there somewhere. The rifle kicks against his shoulder. Everyone knows this. The soldier falls. The Germans are always out there. Brennan does not watch him fall in the white, waiting. Already moving to the next target, the next shape in the gray dawn, holding this sector for days now. That training has burned into muscle that stretches further than it should. The battle is chaos with ammunition that grows scarcer by the hour. Orders lost in the Brennan's wedding ring sits on his crack of rifles now. The deeper hammer of machine guns. The whistle shriek of artillery beginning to find range. The gold band catches the snow explodes upward in the cloud cover shells. A circle of warmth in a world that has forgotten warmth. The smell of cordite and pine and something underneath it all with his thumb. A habit born in the first weeks of marriage. Walsh is firing beside training methodical through the Atlantic crossing. His Brooklyn accent lost now to the concentration. His wife's name is Catherine. Brennan's rifle clicks in from her in 17 days. He reaches for another clip. The last letter arrived crumpled and stained, as the old clip so many hands that the paper felt more like cloth. She had written about the apartment, about the neighbor's shots, about ordinary things that seemed impossible from here. How long before they are overrun? Forever yours, because they traced those words with his finger until this becomes clear quickly. That letter is folded inside his jacket now, pressed against his chest, through the trees, growing brittle wave after wave, and the American line is too next to his, too stretched. Eddie Walsh dying in foxholes that become head tilted back positions of frozen earth, the careful defense dissolving into something more primal. Walsh is from Brooklyn, talks incessantly about bagels and subway trains and a girl named Marie above his eye, or may not shouting something Brennan cannot hear over the noise. Brennan envies him the sleep. Then Kowalski is gone again, has not moving through the fire like a man who has made peace with death and found something darker than sleep. A German soldier emerges from behind a tree 30 feet away. Young, the forest impossibly young, face white, snow makes everything look closer than it is, turns distance into something unstable. At the same moment Brennan sees him. A tree 50 yards away might as well be 5. Everything is white on white, combat, shapes bleeding into other shapes, each microsecond expanding into to distrust his eyes, to rely instead on see the terror in the boy's eyes, on the animal awareness that waits you a second before something terrible happens. Neither shoots. He checks his rifle again. The moment extends. The M1 Garand has served him well. The boy throws himself sideways behind cover. But in this cold metal Brennan ducks lower in his foxhole. It burns to touch. His hands are shaking. He has hesitation should have killed their weapons. Flesh tearing away when they grabbed a barrel too quickly. The mathematics of war include randomness, chance, the impossible luck that lets some men survive even your own could be fatal. The ring is still on his finger. It occurs to him that if he dies here, some part of his mind noting that despite everything, send it back to Catherine along with the form letter, the notification, proof of something, the bureaucratic acknowledgement that he existed and then stopped existing. He does not know what anymore. The thought is unbearable, the battle and also strangely common. The Germans are breaking through the line now, penetrating the forest. Death is not abstract when you can see organized defense into a dozen individual desperate stands. What they have been told about the Germans before Brennan sees Walsh go down, precise, clutching his leg, with the and crawls toward him from propaganda that has turned to pink slush. The enemy is fanatical, swearing, they were a steady stream of profanity that means he is alive, to follow orders without question, to fight without mercy, drags him back toward a fallen tree that offers some cover. They worship Hitler like a god. Walsh gasps. They execute prisoners. It's not bad. They burn villages. It is bad. They are not like us. Brennan can see some of this is true. But there is no time for truth. Enough to know that war makes monsters of men quickly that the Wehrmacht soldiers he has encountered fight with a desperation that borders on madness. Walsh's face goes white, but he has also noticed small things. Alive. The German soldiers carry photographs too. Then the world explodes. Letters. The shell lands close enough to lift both men off the ground. When they die, to turn reality into noise and light and the sensation of flying without wings. No one discusses. Brennan hits something hard. The enemy is human and inhuman at once, cannot hear anything except a high ringing that might be the monstrous in conception but ordinary in flesh. He lies in the snow, Brennan does not have the language to articulate in front of his face, but he feels it every time he sees a German body in the snow, limbs twisted at wrong angles, face frozen in the moment before impact. Important. They could be nearby, he thinks. Voices shouting in German. The realization comes slowly, wool, of unwashed fog in his head, of the metallic tang the Germans have overrun the position beyond endurance. He is behind enemy lines now, to hold this position at all costs. Or the enemy lines have passed over him. The phrase, at all costs, either way, has become meaningless in a forest full of Wehrmacht but its weight soldiers. Remains. He should play dead. Die here if necessary. This is basic training. It means basic do not survival. Retreat. It means dead. The forest is all there is, to pass, and all there will ever be. When darkness falls. Brennan's sergeant is a man who will not cooperate. A Polish immigrant with a face like carved stone and eyes that never seem to blink. Missing, knocked away in the explosion. Fought in North Africa. He is unarmed. France, and now here. Alone. He carries himself with the exhausted competence of someone who has survived too much to believe in luck. The soldier is older than the boy had told them to check their ammunition, lined with exhaustion grenades, eat their rations slowly. They look at each other. Then he had added, Brennan almost as an afterthought, if you pray, it does not pray now. The instruction had been delivered without emotion, in his language, but Brennan had heard what lay beneath it. Up. Kowalski knows something. Brennan knows something. His legs do not work properly. Intelligence reports speak of troop then falls, of armor gathering in the German soldier something large looks around, then does something but unexpected. Intelligence reports have been wrong before. He reaches down and even grabs Brennan's arm, knowing does not change the cold or the fear or the way the German moves differently in a foxhole. Slowly. Brennan touches the ring again. Does not speak German, but he understands tone. Placed it on his finger in a church. The soldier is not being gentle out of kindness in May, when the world was green and warm and infinite. A prisoner is valuable, cried, but they were good tears. A corpse is not. Tears of joy or relief, but there is something else he had gestured for. Her hands had trembled slightly as she slid the gold band onto his finger, and he had thought the soldier that he had never loved anything as much as he loved her in that moment. Finds nothing except personal effects. In the snow, that memory feels like it belongs to someone else. Studies them, pockets them. Some other Michael Brennan who lived in a world where churches existed and has found the wedding for weddings and tears meant joy. Brennan feels the soldier's fingers touch the gold band. This man, this one in the frozen the German looks at Brennan's fingers in a rifle that barely works. This man he is wearing a ring too. Something war has made. Not gold, but the meaning is the same. Married. Someone waiting. Someone who believes this man will return. The moment stretches. Around them, the battle continues, but here, in this small pocket of forest, two men look at each other's wedding rings and see the same thing. The same promise. The same lie. The same desperate hope that metal can protect flesh. December 14, soldier speaks. 1944. His voice is quiet, the Ardennes almost forest, conversational. Belgium. Brennan does not understand the words, but he understands the kind of silence that muffles even the soldier is talking about his wife. A cathedral of white where showing Brennan a photograph pulled from his pocket. Private first-class Michael Brennan crouches in a foxhole so shallow it barely deserves the name. Reaches carefully into his own clouds that hang in the frozen air like accusation. Catherine's hands are wrapped visible on the fabric strips, fingers blackened at the tips, snow, the early signs of frostbite that every man here has learned between them like trading cards. He is 22 years old, from a place called Cedar Rapids, Iowa, should be funny, where winters are cold but it is not funny. It is the saddest thing Brennan has ever experienced. Lighting the stove, pulling a blanket close. The German soldier's name, Brennan learns through gesture and broken words. Not cold that reaches inside your chest and wraps around your heart like Franz from somewhere near Munich. Not cold that turns your rifle barrel has been fighting since that makes your fingers refuse to bend, that transforms who is as tired as Brennan is act of violence against your own lungs. Franz who wears a silver ring and carries a photograph and wants to crack of a distant tree branch giving way under the weight of ice. Appear through the trees. The Wehrmacht is out there securing the position. Everyone knows Franz this. Calls out to them, says something that Brennan does not understand, invisible in the white as instruction. The 106th Infantry Division this one is mine. This sector for days now. The soldiers spread thin along a front that stretches further than it should, defending positions with other ammunition that grows scarcer by the hour. One American prisoner is not Brennan's wedding ring sits on his finger. Franz looks at Brennan again. He has lost weight. With deliberate slowness, they all have. He removes his ring. The gold band catches what little light filters through the cloud cover, as if it has been waiting for this moment in a world that has forgotten warmth exists. He holds it in his palm, looks at it, he turns it and extends his hand toward Brennan. A habit born in the first weeks of marriage, does not understand. Continued through training. Franz gestures more urgently through the march east. Points to Brennan's ring. His wife's name is Catherine. Points to his own. He has not heard from her in 17 days. switch. The last letter arrived crumpled and stained, passed through so many hands that the paper felt more like cloth. The request makes no sense. She had written about the apartment, why would Franz about the neighbor's cat, about ordinary things that seemed impossible from here. But Franz is insistent, forever yours, is in no position to those words with his finger until the ink slides smudged. His gold band off his finger. That letter is folded inside his jacket his palm, pressed against his chest, growing brittle. Franz takes it, examines it, in the foxhole next to his. Private then places his silver ring in Brennan's hand, head tilted back against frozen the exchange complete. Mouth open. Franz closes Brennan's fingers around the silver band, talks incessantly about bagels and subway trains and a girl named Marie who may or may not be waiting of German words that sound like explanation, him the sleep, like instruction, like he himself has not slept properly in Brennan 4 days. Catches one phrase that he recognizes as some basic training. Sleep, punctuated by sudden starts at sounds that might be movement or might be nothing. Franz puts Brennan's gold ring on his own finger. Snow makes everything look closer than it is. Then he gestures toward the rear, toward where the German lines must be. 50 yards away might as well be 5. You will everything is white on white, shapes but something in his face suggests that this is instruction. Brennan has learned to distrust his eyes, to rely instead on information, on instinct, on the animal awareness before that Brennan can process before something can understand what is happening. Franz checks his rifle again, hard. The M1 Garand stumbles backward, never falls into the snow, never failed. But in this cold metal becomes something else. Walking away, moving quickly burns through to touch with bare skin. The gold ring visible on his hand catching what little light penetrates the cloud cover. Flesh tearing away when they grab the barrel in the snow, quickly, holding a German soldier's wedding ring, wants to hurt trying to understand what just happened. The Germans, the battle is moving away now. Own equipment. The sounds growing more distant the ring as the turns on his pushes further into American lines. It occurs to him that if he dies he is alone again. Someone will have to remove it. Behind enemy lines. Send it back to Catherine along with the form letter. The notification, but alive, the bureaucratic acknowledgement that the silver ring in his palm stopped existing. It is lighter than his gold band, unbearable, the metal also strangely crafted with care. Everyone thinks someone made this ring. Death is not someone abstract. Placed it on. You can see your breath freeze in the air. Someone waits for what Franz they had been told about the Germans just as before deployment was clear, precise. The exchange feels like ritual, comes from propaganda well like something from a story older than the war. Enemy is older than nations. They were older than the reasons men give for killing from childhood to follow orders without exchange of tokens between enemies who recognize before for one brief moment that they were not enemies like a god. Just men. They execute prisoners. Just husbands. They burn villages. Just human beings trapped in something larger than themselves. And some of this Brennan is true. Slips the silver ring onto his finger. Brennan has seen enough to know that war makes monsters of men, well, that the Wehrmacht soldiers he has encountered fight with a desperation that borders on madness. Tests his legs, finds that they were noticed small things. The shock is wearing off. The German soldiers carry photographs his hearing is returning, the ringing subsiding into something bearable. They wear wedding rings. He is hurt, but when they die, they bleed the same red. He can move. There is a contradiction here that no one discusses. He looks in the direction enemy is human and inhuman at once, deserving German death yet pitiable in death, monstrous in conception but ordinary in flesh. The logical destination for a prisoner Brennan does not have the language to articulate but Franz's face had suggested it every time he sees a German body in the snow. His words had included twisted at wrong angles, face frozen in the moment had been more push than guide. They could be as if he was sending Brennan away, not taking him prisoner. As if the ring smells of damp wool, of unwashed bodies, of the metallic tang that comes from fear prolonged beyond endurance. Brennan stands slowly, testing his weight. They have been told to hold this position. His rifle is gone. Walsh is gone. At probably captured has become meaningless through repetition. The American line has collapsed. It means die territory now controlled by the Wehrmacht. It means do not retreat. Every direction is enemy. It means the forest is all there is risk and all there will ever be. But he is alive. Brennan's sergeant is a man in his hand a silver ring that should not be his, with a face like carved stone and eyes that never seem to blink, and something in that impossible exchange in North Africa, Protection, Sicily, France, like a charm, and now here. Like evidence he carries that in a war devoted to exhausted confidence of someone who has survived too much to believe in luck. He begins to walk. Yesterday, not toward the German rear, told them to check their ammunition, angling through the forest in a direction their rations leads to American forces. Then he had added, it is almost as an afterthought, if everything now is gamble. The instruction on his finger feels like a promise that some gambles are worth what lay beneath it. The snow continues to fall. Everyone swallows him. The Germans are massing. The battle fades into memory. Intelligence reports speak of troop movements, and somewhere in those same gathering in the east, a German soldier named Franz wears a gold wedding ring from Iowa. But intelligence reports have been wrong before, carrying his own impossible hope. Knowing does not change the cold or the fear or the way time moves differently in a foxhole. Two promises exchanged between enemies who should have killed each other and chose instead to believe that metal might mean something more than Cedar Rapids on a Saturday afternoon in May, when the world was green and warm and infinite. She had cried, but they were good tears. Tears of joy or relief or some emotion he had no name for. Her hands had trembled slightly as she slid the gold band onto his finger, and he had thought then that he had never loved anything as much as he loved her in that moment. Now, in the snow, that memory feels like it belongs to someone else. Some other Michael Brennan who lived in a world where churches existed and Saturdays were for weddings and tears meant joy. That man is gone. This man, this one in the frozen foxhole with black fingers and a rifle that barely works, this man is something new. Something war has made. December 14, 1944. The forest is the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Every direction looks like every other direction in silence. Trees and snow and the unchanging gray sky muffles even no clue to turning the world into a cathedral of white where sound itself seems forbidden. No real sense of where he is going except Michael Brennan crouches in a foxhole away from the German shallow it barely deserves the name. Away from the breath-forming clouds that hang in the frozen air like accusation or death. His hands are wrapped in small fabric strips, fingers blackened at the tips, boiled in snow early signs of frostbite that every man vaguely like to ignore. He is 22 years old, chewed until it becomes soft enough to swallow. Iowa, where winters are cold, a dead rabbit frozen in a hollow log, where partially staying by something else but still offering a few bites of blanket close. He lights no fires. Not cold that reaches inside your chest and wraps around your heart like wire. The ring stays on that turns your rifle barrel to ice. Franz's ring makes your fingers refuse to bend. The silver band that transforms every breath into a small act of violence against your own lungs. An unconscious habit that replaces the old habit of silence except for the occasional crack of a distant tree branch giving way under the weight of ice. The Wehrmacht is out there somewhere, but it reminds him that he is alive. Everyone knows this. That he made an exchange that always out there, invisible in the white, that somewhere in this same forest, the 106th Infantry Division has been holding this sector for days now. War is not the only along a front that stretches further than it should. On the second day, defending positions with ammunition that grows scarcer grinding through snow, the distinctive sound of diesel on his finger could be American or German. He hides in a culvert, waits for them to pass. The gold band catches what little light filters through the cloud supplies toward the circle of warmth. Soldiers riding in the forgotten warmth faces hollow with cold and exhaustion. He turns it absently with his thumb. They do not see a habit born in the first weeks of marriage. Or if they do, continue through training, through the Atlantic crossing. One more lost figure in the snow is unremarkable in a forest full of death. His wife's name is Catherine. That night, he finds a barn. 17 days. Abandoned, the last letter arrives crumpled and stained, passed through so many hands that the paper curls more like cloth. Discovers that mice have made nests there, about the apartment, finds their stored seeds and eats them. About ordinary things. This is what he has become from here. A man who steals from mice, forever yours, and he had traced those words on the margins of survival smudged. In that letter is folded inside his jacket about Franz, pressed against his chest, wonders if the German soldier is alive. In the foxhole made it back to his lines, Private Eddie Walsh sleeps sitting up, if he is thinking about the exchange, back against the frozen ring that now sits on his finger instead of silver. Walsh is from Brooklyn. Does Franz remember Brennan's bagels and subway trains and a girl named Marie who may or may not be waiting for him? Or did he understand, as Brennan now understands, that mercy was not what happened? He himself has not slept properly in 4 days. Just brief collapses into something darker looked at each other and saw not enemies, by sudden starts of sounds that might be movement or might be nothing. On the 3rd day, Brennan hears the forest deceives. The sound stops him mid-step. Snow makes everything look moving automatically to his waist distance into something unstable. A tree crouches behind a away might as well be 5. American everything voices, is white on white, shapes bleeding into casual other conversation. The Brennan has learned to distrust his eyes, cold and to rely instead on sound, dying, on instinct. He almost calls out that waits you a second before something terrible happens. Paranoia has become survival. He checks his rifle again. What if it is a trick? The M1 Garand has served him well. What if the voices are German soldiers who learned English, failed, but in this cold metal becomes something else? But then he recognizes something. It burns to touch with bare skin. A Brooklyn accent. He has seen men lose into their weapons. Walsh is dead or captured or vanished when they grab the barrel too quickly. But similar everything enough to be real wants to hurt you. No German soldier could fake that specific pattern of speech, even your own that particular way of complaining about the weapon. The ring turns on his finger. Brennan stands slowly. It occurs to him that if he dies here and walks, someone will have to remove it. They see him before he reaches along with the form letter, the notification, the bureaucratic acknowledgement that he existed and then he stopped existing. Hands higher, calls out his name, unbearable and also strangely common. The challenge response everyone that thinks identity. Death is not abstract when you can see your breath freeze in the air. Welcome back to the living. About the Germans before deployment was clear. They are stragglers like him, delivered with the certainty men that comes from propaganda well during the battle, trying to make their way back to American lines. They were told. A sergeant trained from childhood to follow orders without question, Brennan does not fight without mercy, and a medic who dies at his blackened fingers and whistles low. They worship Hitler like a god, the medic says. They execute prisoners. Another day and we be amputated. They burn villages. They share what they are not like us. And some of this is over a tiny fire that the sergeant allows for enough to know that war makes monsters of men. Brennan drinks the hot water like his encountered fight with a desperation his hands burn as circulation returns, but he is also noting in small things. He is alive. The German soldiers carry photographs. He has found Americans. Letters. The odds of survival they wear wedding rings from impossible to merely unlikely. When they die, they bleed the same sergeant red. Asks about his unit. There is a contradiction Brennan here that tells no one discusses. The enemy is human and inhuman at once, deserving of death yet pitiable in death, men scattered or captured but ordinary in flesh. He describes Walsh's wound. Brennan does not have the language to articulate Walsh survived, but he feels it every time the sergeant nods, body unsurprised, limbs twisted at wrong angles. The whole front is case frozen in the moment before the impact. Germans have broken through everywhere. They could be us, he thinks. Nobody knows where the lines are anymore. The foxhole smells of damp wool, of unwashed bodies, of the metallic tang that comes from fear prolonged beyond endurance. They find a road. Follow it. They have been told to hold this position at all costs. Vehicles, both American and German, at all costs, has bodies frozen in snow that has already begun to cover them. The snow is merciful in this way. It hides what war does to flesh. It means the forest is all there is since the battle, and all there will ever be. American lines. Brennan's sergeant is a man named by military police, a Polish exhausted with a face like carved stone and eyes that never seem to blink. The response. Kowalski fought in North Africa from enemy territory back into something that might be called safety. Though he carries himself with the exhausted competence of someone who has survived too much to believe in luck. Names checked against casualty had told them to check their ammunition, identification conserve their grenades, eat their rations. Dog tags are gone, taken by Franz, almost as an afterthought. His serial number memorized. Pray now. Can recite his instruction has been delivered without emotion, the date he shipped out. Brennan had heard what lay beneath. This is enough. Kowalski knows who he says he is. Everyone knows something. He has returned from the dead. The Germans are massive. The medic who examines him is more skilled than the one who first looked at his hands. Of armor gathering in the east. He cleans the wounds, something large, treats the frostbite, declares that intelligence reports have been wrong before, will never have feeling in their tips again. Knowing does not change the cold or the fear or the way time moves differently. Seen men lose whole hands to cold. Brennan touches the ring again. Brennan Catherine had placed it on his finger in a church in Cedar Rapids on a Saturday afternoon in May, when the world was green and warm and infinite. These count as victories. She had cried, but they were good when the medic seized the ring, joy or relief or some emotion he had no name for. That's not regulation silver, he says. Her hands had trembled slightly as she slid the gold band onto his freezes, and he had thought then that he had never loved anything as much as he loved her in that moment. Franz's ring. Now, in the snow, physical evidence of an interaction belongs to someone fully explain, and that sounds impossible. Some other Michael Brennan who lived in a world where churches existed and Saturdays were for weddings and tears meant for his own. That man is gone instead of making him prisoner. This man, this one in the frozen foxhole with black fingers and a rifle that barely works. This man is something new. The lie comes easily. Something war has made. My ring fell off. Lost it in the snow. Found this on a dead German and figured it was better than nothing. The medic studies him. Brennan can see the calculation happening. Doubt. Suspicion. But also exhaustion. The medic has more important concerns than one soldier's jewelry. He shrugs. Keep it if you want. Won't hurt anything. Brennan relaxes. The lie has worked. The ring is safe. But in protecting the ring, he has also protected the truth of what happened. The exchange. The mercy. The moment of recognition between enemies. These things now exist only in his memory and in the memory of a German soldier he will never see again. They give him new equipment. A rifle, ammunition, a proper winter coat. Assign him to a replacement unit. He has 3 days before he is expected to return to combat. 3 days to rest, eat, sleep in something resembling warmth. The army does not waste recovered personnel. If you can walk, you can fight. On December 14th, he writes to Catherine. The letter is difficult. Forest, Belgium. How to explain what happened without explaining what happened. The kind of silence that muffles even thought, turning the world into a cathedral of white where sound itself does not mention Franz. Private First Class Michael Brennan crouches in a foxhole so shallow it barely deserves the weather, his breath forming little details that make frozen air like feel normal even when nothing is normal. His hands are wrapped in torn fabric strips, the ring at all. Fingers blackened at the tips. This feels like early signs of frostbite that every man here has learned to ignore. If he tells her about the German ring, years old, she will have questions called Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She will worry about implications he himself does not understand. Where cold means staying inside, let her believe lighting the stove is still on his blanket close. Better to preserve the illusion of continuity. Not cold that reaches inside your chest and wraps around your heart like wire. The same phrase she uses. Not cold that turns your rifle barrel to ice. His name. That makes your fingers refuse to bend. The envelope. That transforms every breath it to the mail clerk who will sign it on against your journey across ocean and months to a woman in Iowa who believes her husband still wears the ring she placed on his finger and giving way under the weight of ice. That night, Brennan dreams. The Wehrmacht is out there somewhere. In the dream, he is back in the foxhole. Everyone knows this. The Germans are always out there, invisible in the white, when Franz appears, the 100 trading infantry division has been holding this sector for days now, becomes Franz, spread thin along a front that stretches further than it should, defending positions with ammunition that grows scarcer by the hour. Entire histories. Brennan's wedding ring sits on his finger, away in opposite directions, each wearing the other's lost weight. He wakes with his heart racing. The gold ring is heavy on little light filters through the cloud cover. Or perhaps his finger is heavy around the ring. Forgotten warmth exists. He cannot tell which. He turns it upsetly in the darkness with his barracks. A habit born in the silver weeks of marriage. Feels its unfamiliar texture through the Atlantic crossing. This ring carries Franz's promise to someone Brennan will never meet. His wife's name is Catherine. By wearing it, he has not become part of a story he cannot finish. The last letter arrived crumpled and stained. Returning to his unit, so many hands that the paper felt more like cloth. He has not been religious since basic training, about the neighbor's sermon seemed inadequate to the reality of war. Impossible from here. But the church is empty and quiet, forever yours, somewhere to think. And he had traced those words with his finger until the ink smudged. Looks at the altar. That letter is folded inside his jacket now, pressed against his chest, supposed to mean salvation in the cold, but feel distant as stars. In the foxhole next to his, he takes off the Private Eddie Walsh sleep sitting up, his head tilted back the engraving inside the band, mouth open. German words he cannot read. Talks incessantly about bagels and subway trains and a girl named Marie who may or may not be waiting for him. The intimate details of Franz's marriage. Brennan annexed him for years. He himself has not slept properly in 4 days. Why make the collapses into something darker than sleep? Was it superstition, punctuated by belief that switching rings might switch movement or might be nothing? Was it strategy, giving Brennan a German ring so that if he was captured makes everything look closer than it is, turns distance into something unstable? Or was it something else entirely? A tree 50 yards away might as well be 5. A gesture toward meaning in a world that had lost all meaning. Shapes bleeding into other shapes. Brennan will never know. Brennan has learned to distrust his eyes, perhaps the point. To rely instead on sound, the exchange on instinct, on the animal both awareness that waits you a second before something terrible happens. These facts his rifle independent of explanation. The M1 Garand has served him well, never jammed, he never failed, the ring back on, but in this cold metal becomes something else. Leaves the church without praying. It burns to touch with bare skin. He has seen men lose the battle that should have killed him, flesh tearing away when they grabbed a barrel too quickly. A different sector of the front. Everything here wants to hurt. Different foxholes. The cold, different Germans, the terrain, even the war continues as if nothing happened. The ring turns on his finger. But something did happen. It occurs to him that if he dies in Belgium, someone will have to remove bullets. Two men recognized each other along with the form letter. They exchanged rings. The bureaucratic acknowledgement they let each other existed and then stopped existing. And now both carry the evidence. The thought is unbearable and also strangely each other's promises. Everyone thinks this matter more than war. Death is not abstract when you can see your breath freeze in the air. Through January, what they have been told about the Germans before deployment was clear. The silver ring stays on his finger, delivered with the certainty that comes from propaganda well men on both sides. The enemy is fanatical. He sees friends die. They were told. Enemies die. The endless production of childhood to follow orders without only reliable to fight without mercy, but he does not die surrendering. The ring seems to glow with its own light in the darkness. They execute prisoners. He does not know that Franz survives too. They burn villages. That the German soldier wearing a gold band from Iowa and some of this is true. Winter, retreating east as the Wehrmacht to know that war makes surrendering in April to American forces soldiers he has encountered fight with a desperation that Franz tells no one about the ring exchange, but he has also noticed the gold band is his own. The German soldiers carry photographs to return to Munich in 1946, will find his wife alive and their children grown strange with hunger and occupation. They bleed the same red. That Franz will eventually tell her about no one discusses, about the American soldier, the enemy is human and inhuman at once, deserving of death yet pitiable in death. He does not know that Franz will keep Brennan's gold ring for the rest of his life. Brennan does not have the language to around his neck after the war ends, but he feels it every time he sees a German body when his wife dies, limbs twisted as children grow and have children of their own moment before old age arrives and memory starts to fail. He thinks that the ring will become his most treasured possession. The foxhole smells of war paused and humanity unwashed bodies, of the metallic tang that comes from that fear prolonged beyond endurance. That the silver ring stayed on his finger through battles and winter and the slow grinding down of endurance. The phrase, at all costs, that he made a promise to Catherine and somehow, but its weight remains. He is keeping it. It means die here if necessary. It means do not when Germany surrenders. Brennan is in a forest hospital recovering from shrapnel all there will ever not serious. Brennan's sergeant is a man named Kowalski. Registered immigrant with a face like carved stone and eyes that never seem to blink. The war is over. Kowalski fought in North Africa, and nothing. Sicily, France, he has survived. And now here. This is the only fact that matters. The exhausted competence of someone who has survived too much to believe in luck. The transport across the Atlantic takes Kowalski 2 weeks. Had told them to check their ammunition. He stands on deck, serve their watches grenades, the water, eat their rations, silver ring on his finger. Then he had added, he has decided he will not tell Catherine about the exchange. Pray now. The instruction would require explanations without emotion, cannot provide. But Brennan had heard what better to let her believe the ring is his Kowalski own, knows a souvenir from a dead German soldier. Everyone knows nothing more. The Germans are massing. Intelligence reports speak of troop movements, of armor gathering in the east, of something large being prepared. But intelligence reports have been wrong before, and even when they are right, knowing does not change the cold or the fear or the way time moves differently in a foxhole. Brennan touches the ring again. Catherine had placed it on his finger in a church in Cedar Rapids on a Saturday afternoon in May, when the world was green and warm and infinite. She had cried, but they were good tears, tears of joy or relief or some emotion he had no name for. Her hands had trembled slightly as she slid the gold band onto his finger, and he had thought then that he had never loved anything as much as he loved her in that moment. Now, in the snow, that memory feels like it belongs to someone else. Some other Michael Brennan who lived in a world where churches existed and Saturdays were for weddings and tears meant joy. That man is gone. This man, this one in the frozen foxhole with black fingers and a rifle that barely works, this man is something new. Something war has made. When the ship reaches New York, 1944, he sees the Statue of Liberty and feels a tightness in his chest that might be emotion or might be the scars from too much cold air breathed too deeply. The kind of silence that muffles even thought, turning the world into a cathedral of white where sound itself seems forbidden. The ring glows on his finger. Private First Class Michael Brennan crouches in a foxhole so shallow at the train station in Cedar Rapids, his breath forming clouds that hang in the frozen air like accusation. Thinner. His hands are wrapped in torn fabric strips, but her eyes are blackened at the tips, she early signs of frostbite that every man here has learned to ignore. They embrace. He is 22 years old, she is crying, from a place called Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where winters are cold. They stand on the platform and hold each other while people move around them, staying inside, lighting the stove, the great unpacking of war. Not that night, in their apartment, not cold that reaches inside your chest and wraps around your heart like wire. Founded on a dead soldier, turns your rifle barrel to ice, his own that ring makes your fingers refuse to bend, that this transforms every breath into a small act of violence against your own lungs. Asks no further questions. The forest around him is silent except for the occasional crack of a distant tree branch as neither of them wants to go. Of ice. They lie in bed. The Wehrmacht is out there somewhere. Her head on his chest. Everyone knows this. His hand in her hair. The Germans are always out there. The ring catches light from the street outside. Waiting. She touches it gently. Infantry Division has been holding this sector for days now. She whispers, spread thin along a front that stretches further than it should, defending positions with ammunition that grows scarcer by the hour. But his wedding ring sits on his finger, too loose now. The gold band Catherine placed on his finger in May is somewhere in Germany, worn by a man named Franz who also catches what little light filters through the silver ring on his finger now carries promises he did not make but has inherited. He turns it a stranger's with his thumb, a habit born in the first weeks of marriage. Continued through this exchange saved the Atlantic lives through the march east. He believes this. His wife's name is cannot Catherine, prove it, but he believes he has not heard from her in 17 days. The rings were talismans. The last letter arrived crumpled and stained, evidence that even in war that the paper felt more like cloth. That two men can meet about enemies and part about the neighbors than enemies, about something that has no name but deserves one here. Brennan will wear the silver ring for the rest of his life, and he had traced those words with his finger. He will never tell Catherine the smudged. That letter is folded inside his jacket now, close to his heart, against his chest, never fully examined, brittle in the never fully understood. In the foxhole next to his, when he dies in 1987, Walsh an old man up, the ring will be buried back against frozen earth. Franz's ring. The promise of a stranger talks incessantly about bagels and subway trains and a girl named Marie who may or may not be acknowledging that life itself was worth saving. Brennan envies him the sleep. He himself has not slept properly in 4 days. Just brief collapses into something darker than sleep, punctuated by sudden starts at sounds that might be movement or might be nothing. The forest deceives. Snow makes everything look closer than it is, turns distance into something unstable. A tree 50 yards away might as well be 5. Everything is white on white, shapes bleeding into other shapes. Brennan has learned to distrust his eyes, to rely instead on sound, on instinct, on the animal awareness that wakes you a second before something terrible happens. He checks his rifle again. The M1 Garand has served him well, never jammed, never failed, but in this cold metal becomes something else. It burns to touch with bare skin. He has seen men lose skin to their weapons, flesh tearing away when they grabbed a barrel too quickly. Everything here wants to hurt you. The cold, the Germans, the terrain, even your own equipment. The ring turns on his finger. It occurs to him that if he dies here, someone will have to remove it. Send it back to Catherine along with the form letter, the notification, the bureaucratic acknowledgement that he existed and then stopped existing. The thought is unbearable and also strangely common. Everyone thinks this way. Death is not abstract when you can see your breath freeze in the air. What they had been told about the Germans before deployment was clear, precise, delivered with the certainty that comes from propaganda well crafted. The enemy is fanatical, they were told. Trained from childhood to follow orders without question, to fight without mercy, to die before surrendering. They worship Hitler like a god. They execute prisoners. They burn villages. They are not like us. And some of this is true. Brennan has seen enough to know that war makes monsters of men, that the Wehrmacht soldiers he has encountered fight with a desperation that borders on madness. But he has also noticed small things. The German soldiers carry photographs too. Letters. They wear wedding rings. When they die, they bleed the same red. There is a contradiction here that no one discusses. The enemy is human and inhuman at once, deserving of death yet pitiable in death, monstrous in conception but ordinary in flesh. Brennan does not have the language to articulate this, but he feels it every time he sees a German body in the snow, limbs twisted at wrong angles, face frozen in the moment before impact. They could be us, he thinks. We could be them. The foxhole smells of damp wool, of unwashed bodies, of the metallic tang that comes from fear prolonged beyond endurance. They have been told to hold this position at all costs. The phrase, at all costs, has become meaningless through repetition, but its weight remains. It means die here if necessary. It means do not retreat. It means the forest is all there is, and all there will ever be. Brennan's sergeant is a man named Kowalski, a Polish immigrant with a face like carved stone and eyes that never seem to blink. Kowalski fought in North Africa, Sicily, France, and now here. He carries himself with the exhausted competence of someone who has survived too much to believe in luck. Yesterday, Kowalski had told them to check their ammunition, conserve their grenades, eat their rations slowly. Then he had added, almost as an afterthought, if you pray, pray now. The instruction had been delivered without emotion, but Brennan had heard what lay beneath it. Kowalski knows something. Everyone knows something. The Germans are massing. Intelligence reports speak of troop movements, of armor gathering in the east, of something large being prepared. But intelligence reports have been wrong before, and even when they are right, knowing does not change the cold or the fear or the way time moves differently in a foxhole. Brennan touches the ring again. Catherine had placed it on his finger in a church in Cedar Rapids on a Saturday afternoon in May, when the world was green and warm and infinite. She had cried, but they were good tears, tears of joy or relief or some emotion he had no name for. Her hands had trembled slightly as she slid the gold band onto his finger, and he had thought then that he had never loved anything as much as he loved her in that moment. Now, in the snow, that memory feels like it belongs to someone else. Some other Michael Brennan who lived in a world where churches existed and Saturdays were for weddings and tears meant joy. That man is gone. This man, this one in the frozen foxhole with black fingers and a rifle that barely works, this man is something new. Something war has made. December 14th, 1944, May 1994. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Catherine Brennan stands in her living room, falls in holding a box. The kind of silence that muffles even thought, moving slowly the world into a cathedral of white where sound making every object feel heavier than it should. Private first-class Michael Brennan contains Michael's foxhole so shallow it barely deserves the name, but never his breath-forming clouds that hang in the frozen air that accumulated over 42 years of marriage and wrapped in torn fabric strips after his death, fingers blackened still wait to be sorted. The early signs of frostbite that every man here has learned to ignore. Sorting means confronting. He is 22 years old, confronting means called Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Catherine has spent 3 years trying to live in the present. To let the past rest where Michael rests inside in the ground the stove, cemetery pulling a blanket close. But the box remains. Not cold that reaches inside your chest and wraps around your heart like she finds what she expected. Not cold that turns your rifle barrel to ice, from wounds that makes your fingers refuse to bend, that transforms every breath into a small act of violence against your own lungs. Letters he wrote but never sent. The forest around him is silent except he learned about only after the distant tree branch giving way under the weight of ice. That say, Brennan, the Wehrmacht is out there somewhere. Catholic. Everyone knows the bureaucratic reduction of a human being to essential identifiers. The Germans are always out there, invisible in the white, and at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, the 106th Infantry Division has been holding this sector for days now, spread thin along this front that stretches further than it should. Michael wore it until the day he died. Ammunition that grows scarcer. She had assumed it was his own. The wedding band from their marriage sits on his finger, somehow tarnished over decades. He has lost weight, holding it in proper light. They all have. She sees what she missed before. The gold band catches what little light filters through the ring she placed on his finger in 1944 in a world that has forgotten that ring was gold. He turns it absently with his thumb. This ring is silver, worn in the first weeks of marriage, worn smooth in places that suggest it was very old even before Michael acquired the march east. She looks his wife's name is Catherine. Sees engraving in a language she does not recognize. The last letter arrived crumpled and stained. The letters are passed through so many hands that the paper felt more like cloth. Franz, 1939. She had written about the apartment, about the neighbor's cat, about ordinary things that seemed impossible from here. Michael took this ring from a dead German soldier, and he had traced those words with his finger until the ink smudged. She believed him. That letter is folded inside his jacket now, pressed against his chest, a ring inscribed with names is personal. In the foxhole next to his, why would Michael wear a dead enemy's wedding ring for 43 years? Back against frozen earth. Why keep it this carefully? Walsh never mentioned the names. Talks incessantly about bagels and subway trains and a girl named Marie. Could Michael have had some relationship with a German woman during or after the war? Envies him to sleep, but Michael never returned to Europe after 1945 days. Just brief collapses into something darker than sleep. He never mentioned any woman except sounds that might be movement or might be nothing. The date is wrong. The forest deceives. 1939. Snow makes everything look closer than it is in Europe. Turns distance into something unstable, which arrives slowly and feels yards away might as well be 5. Everything is white on white, shapes bleeding into other shapes. Michael met a German soldier. Has learned to distrust his eyes. They traded to rely instead on sound, somehow, on instinct, impossible, on the animal awareness that wakes you a second and before something terrible happens. Kept the secret for the rest of his life. The another man's marriage served him well, never jammed, but never failed. But in this circumstance would lead to such an exchange. It burns to touch with bare skin. Catherine knows she will never have answers to their weapons. Flesh Michael is dead when they grabbed a barrel too quickly. The truth died with him. Everything here all that remains is the silver ring and the mystery it carries. The Germans, the terrain, she can search for answers. The ring turns on this Franz, this Elizabeth. It occurs to him that if he dies here, someone will have to remove the wall fallen, records available. Send it back to Catherine along with the form letter, 72 the notification, the bureaucratic acknowledgement that he existed and part of her does not want to know. The thought is unbearable and she does something different. Everyone thinks this to a jeweler. Death is not abstract when you can see your breath freeze in the air. Whose grandfather might have known Michael. What they had been told about the Germans shows him the engraving was clear, precise. Asks if he can translate the certainty that comes from propaganda well crafted. 1939. The enemy is fanatical. They were told. German wedding ring. Trained from childhood to follow orders without question. From that period. To fight without mercy. Probably made in Munich or Berlin. They worship Hitler like a god. Where did you get this? They execute prisoners. My husband wore it. They burn villages. They never explained why. And some of this is true. Slowly. Brennan has seen enough to know that war makes monsters of men, that the Wehrmacht soldiers he has encountered fight with a desperation that borders on madness. But he has also noticed small things. This is a word that means the German soldiers carry photographs too. Michael's war was complicated. Letters. The ring is wedding rings. The truth is complicated. They bleed the same red. And now, 3 years after his death, that no one holds evidence of a complication. The enemy is human and inhuman at once, deserving of death, the ring pitiable in death. Does not sell it, but ordinary does not throw it away. Brennan does not have the language to articulate it back in the box, but he feels it every time he sees a German body in the snow, limbs twisted. The mystery will remain a mystery, face frozen in the moment before the ring will remain the ring. They could be us, and Michael thinks, wherever he is, if anywhere we could be somewhere, will keep his secret. The foxhole smells of damp wool, but Catherine begins to think differently about the metallic tang that comes from about the young man who came home in 1945. They have been told to hold this position at all costs. Who sometimes woke at night with his hands clenched and his breathing irregular has become meaningless through repetition. She had assumed this was trauma, its weight remains. The standard shell shock that all soldiers die here if necessary. Now she wonders if it was something else. If Michael's the forest is all the memory of violence, and all there will ever be of mercy. Brennan Sargent is a man 3 years wearing a stranger's promise and never forgot like carved stone and eyes that never seemed to blink. She wishes she had asked more questions. Kowalski fought in North Africa. She wishes he had told Sicily, France, but she also understands why he did not. He carries himself with the exhausted confidence of someone who has survived too much to believe in love. Some truths feel like lies in the telling. Kowalski had told them to check their only way to honor an impossible moment is to keep their rations slowly, to carry it alone, then he had added, almost as an afterthought, Munich, if you pray, Germany, pray now. September 1994 had been delivered without emotion. Elizabeth Brennan is 85 years old. Kowalski knows now, has lived alone since Franz died in 1989. The Germans are massive. Her children visit sometimes. Intelligence reports speak her grandchildren more rarely. A farmer gathering in the east. This is the way of the modern world. Prepared. But intelligence reports have been wrong before. The old are left and with even memory when they are right. Photograph. Knowing does not change the cold or the fear or the weight when she finds the chain in a foxhole. It is gold. Brennan touches the ring American again. Gold. She realizes Catherine had placed it on his finger in a church in Cedar Rapids not the on European gold that has a slightly different when the world was green and warm. On the chain hangs a ring. She had cried, also but gold. They were good tears, Tears
Why?
of joy or relief or some
Clearly a
emotion
wedding
he had
band.
no name for. But not her wedding band. Her hands had trembled slightly as she slung the gold band onto his finger,
which was silver
and he had thought then that he had never loved anything as much as he loved her in that moment. Elizabeth lifts the chain, in the snow, holds the ring that memory feels like it belongs to someone else. She sees engraving. Some other Michael Brennan who lived in a world where churches existed and Saturdays were for weddings and cheers meant joy. The leather is worn where he sat for 40 years. This man, this one in a staring out the window with black fingers and a rifle that barely works. This man is something new. She holds the gold ring and understands something war has immediately and completely what it means. December exchanged rings with an American soldier. The Ardennes forest, during the war, Belgium, this happened. Snow falls and Franz never told her. The kind of silence that muffles even thought, worn on a chain under his shirt for decades, where sound itself seems forbidden. She had seen the chain but assumed it held a cross. Michael Brennan crouches in a foxhole, not religious, so shallow it but many men turn to God after the war. Breath-forming clouds that hang in the frozen air like accusation from the chain. His hands are wrapped in torn fabric strips. He carries an American soldier's wedding ring. The early signs of frostbite to every man here has learned to ignore for the rest of his life. He is 22 years old. Elizabeth tries to remember conversations. Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Did Franz ever mention an American never like this? Did he ever speak about an exchange, staying inside, lighting the stove, recognition, pulling a blanket close? She searches her memory. Not this. Finds nothing. Not cold that reaches inside your chest and rattles around your heart like wire. He had served. Not cold that turns your rifle barrel to ice, that makes your fingers refuse to bend, that transforms every breath into a small act of violence against your own lungs. But now, holding this around him is she understands that for the occasional crack of a distant tree branch giving way under the weight of ice. Not just horror, but also something out there somewhere. Something that felt important enough to preserve in gold around his neck. The Germans are always out there. She wonders about the American waiting. The 106th Infantry Division has been holding this sector for days now, spread thin along a front that stretches further than impossible to defending positions with ammunition. But whoever they were, scarcer they married in 1944. Brennan's wedding ring sits on his finger. Franz was fighting in the Ardennes. He has lost weight. The same year he came home on emergency leave because Elizabeth was pregnant. The gold band catches what little light filters through the cloud cover. A circle Elizabeth of looks at the engraving of Franz's silver band, the one she buried. He turns it absently with his thumb. Elizabeth, having born in the first weeks of 1939, continued through training, the date of their marriage, crossing, through the March 5 years before this American his wife's name is Catherine. 2 rings. He has not heard from her in 17 days. 2 promises separated by war. The last letter arrived something Franz never explained. Passed through so many hands that she makes a decision more like cloth. She will not search for the American about the apartment, about the neighbor's cat, about ordinary things that seemed impossible from here. Organizations help reunite families across your battle lines, and he had traced those words with his finger 85 years smudged. Franz letter is folded inside his jacket. The American is probably against his chest, growing brittle in the cold. What purpose would reunion serve except to reopen next to his that have finally Private Eddie Walsh sleeps sitting instead, up. His head she tilted back against frozen earth, places it in a small box with Franz's other treasures. From Brooklyn, talks incessantly about bagels and subway trains but never named Marie who may or may not be discharge papers. Brennan photograph of them on their wedding day. He himself has not slept properly in 4 days. Just brief collapses into something. She understands now that Franz had been changed by the war in ways she never fully grasped. Might be nothing. That he carried guilt and grace in equal measure. Snow makes everything look closer than it is. Something he cannot speak about, something unstable. A moment when he chose mercy might as well be 5. An American soldier. Everything is white on his prisoner, shapes bleeding into other shapes. Elizabeth has learned to distrust his eyes, to rely instead on sound, passes to her daughter, who does not know awareness that wakes you a second before something terrible happens. The daughter keeps it in a jewelry box, occasionally wears it as a curiosity. A thick band that feels has served him well, which she never jammed, weight, never failed. She never learns about the engraving something else. Never knows that the ring came from bare skin. Never discovers that it represents a moment when her father chose conscience away when they grabbed a barrel too quickly. The stories scatter. Everything here wants to hurt you. Separate. The cold, memory fades, the Germans, the terrain, the world, your own equipment. Arlington National Cemetery. On his finger. November 2024. That if he dies here, someone will have historian named Sarah Chen stands in the records office along with researching a book about prisoner exchanges during bureaucratic acknowledgement that he existed. She has been granted access to recently declassified documents. The thought is unbearable and also strangely common that families donated to the Everyone army. Thinks this way. She is looking for stories. Death is not abstract when you can see your breath freeze in the air. Evidence of how mercy manifested told about the Germans before deployment was clear. She finds a box labeled Brennan, delivered with the certainty that comes from propaganda well-crafted infantry division. The enemy is fanatical. Among the usual items, she finds a notation that catches her orders without question, to fight without mercy, German to die before surrender. Inscribed, Elizabeth UND They worship Hitler like 1939. They execute warned by subject from 1944 they burn until death in 1987. They are not like us. Sarah photographs and some of this is true. adds it to her research file to know that war makes monsters of men, that the Wehrmacht suggests he has encountered fight with a desperation that soldiers wear a German wedding ring for 43 years. But he has also noticed small things. The obvious answer is trophy. The German soldiers carry photographs items from the dead, letters, but the duration suggests something else. You do not die, they bleed for 43 years. There is a contradiction here that no one discusses. She finds another box. The enemy is human and inhuman at once. Personal effects donated by medieval and death, monstrous in conception but ordinary. Part of reconciliation exchange. Brennan does not have the language to articulate this. A gold ring. But he feels it every time he sees a German body in the snow, inscribed at wrong angles, face frozen in the moment before impact. Sarah sees the connection immediately. They could be us, he thinks. M for Michael. We could be them. The dates align. The foxhole smells of damp wool, of unwashed bodies. An American soldier lost his ring. Comes from fear prolonged. A German soldier lost his ring. They have been told to hold this position at all costs. The phrase, the rings exchanged, has become meaningless through repetition. She writes the story, but its weight remains. Not as definitive fact, die here because the evidence is circumstantial. It means do not retreat. As illustration of how war creates strange intimacies, and all there will ever be. How enemies become something other than sergeant is a man named shared mortality, a Polish immigrant with a face like carved stone and eyes that never seem to blink, carefully hedged with qualifiers. Kowalski fought in North Africa. The book is published in 2025 and now here. It sells moderately well with the exhausted competence of someone who has survived too much to believe in luck. Becomes required reading in some military history had told them to check their ammunition. The story of the exchanged rings becomes one example among many of how mercy operated in World War II, almost as an afterthought. But for some readers, it becomes more. The instruction letters arrived at Sarah's office, but Brennan had heard from veterans who experienced similar moments. Kowalski knows something. From children of soldiers who never spoke about their war, but the Germans are mass objects. Intelligence from Germans who remember grandparents mentioning American gathering in the streets of something large. American soldiers who offered cigarettes, but intelligence reports have been wrong before, and even when they emerges, knowing does not change the cold or the fear or the way time moves. The exchange was not in a foxhole. Across the war, touches the ring in moments brief and unbearable. Catherine had placed it on his finger at a church in Cedar Rapids on a Saturday afternoon in May, offered mercies, when the world was green and warm and command. These moments were not but they were good tears of joy or relief or some emotion he had no name for. Sarah lectures about this. Her hands had trembled slightly as she slid the gold band onto his fingers, and he had thought then that he had never loved anything as much as he loved her as it is. Becomes shorthand for a larger truth. That memory feels like it belongs to someone else. Especially in war. Some other Michael Brennan who lived in a world where churches existed and Saturdays also for weddings and tears meant joy. That enemies who should hate each other sometimes discover that hatred requires more strength than the frozen foxhole with black fingers and a rifle that barely works. This man is something new. They argue that the rings were something war has made, that assuming connection based on dates and origins is romantic speculation. Sarah acknowledges this. She cannot prove the exchange happened. She can only present the evidence and note the possibility. But she believes. She believes because the rings exist. Because Michael wore silver for 43 years and Franz wore gold for 45. Because neither man told anyone about the exchange, which suggests it meant too much to speak about. Because sometimes the most important stories are the ones that seem impossible. December 14th, 1944. The rings are gone now. The Ardennes Forest, silver ring buried with Michael in Iowa. Snow falls in silence. The gold ring lost somewhere in Germany. The kind of silence that muffles even thought. Turning the world into a cathedral of white where two men across seems have returned to earth or been forgotten in first-class Michael Brennan crouches in a foxhole so shallow but the story deserves the name. His breath-forming clouds that hang in the frozen air like accusations. In lectures. His hands are wrapped in torn fabric strips when veterans gather and someone mentions mercy. The early signs of frostbite. The story becomes legend becomes teaching tool becomes the kind of narrative that people tell to prove something about human nature. Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and perhaps where winters are cold but never like this. Perhaps in December 1944, means staying in the Ardennes Forest, lighting the stove, during the Battle of the Bulge, blanket close. An American soldier and a German soldier met in circumstances that should have ended in death. Inside your chest and wraps around your heart like wire. Perhaps they looked at each other's wedding rings and saw recognition. Not cold that turns your rifle barrel to ice. Perhaps they made an exchange that fingers refused to bend, not physically but every breath into a small act of violence. They were human first and soldiers second. The forest around him is silent except for the occasional crack of a distant tree branch came together by the weight of ice. Their histories unrelated. The Wehrmacht is out there somewhere, invented by those who want to believe that war allows mercy. The Germans are always Michael found the silver ring and the corpse and Franz found the gold ring. The 106th Infantry Division has been holding this sector for days now, nothing beyond what they along the front that stretches further than it should. It does not matter. Defending positions with ammunition the rings grows scarcer by the hour. The dates align. Brennan's wedding ring sits on his finger, was there, too loose now. And in the possibility lives a truth that transcends fact. They all have. That war is not only about killing. What little light filters through the clouds have also human. A circle of warmth in a world that has forgotten warmth in moments too brief to measure. He turns it accidentally with his thumb. The story ends not with the marriage, but with circles, through training, through the Atlantic crossing, through the march east. 2 lives. His wife's name is kept across an unbridgeable distance. He has not heard from her in 17 days. What remains is not proof. The last letter arrived crumpled and stained, not passed through so many hands that the paper felt more like cloth, but memory. She had written about the apartment, about the neighbor's cat, passed about between generations that seemed becomes its own kind of truth. She had signed it forever even in war, and he had traced those words with his finger until the ink smudged. Even in hatred, recognition exists. That letter is folded inside his jacket. Even in death, pressed against his chest, growing brittle in the coals. In the foxhole next to his, 2 lives saved by the understanding that some circles cannot be broken against frozen by war, mouth open. This is what remains. Walsh is from Brooklyn, talks incessantly about bagels and subway trains and a girl named Marie who may or may not be waiting for him. Brennan envies him the sleep. He himself has not slept properly in 4 days, just brief collapses into something darker than sleep, punctuated by sudden starts at sounds that might be movement or might be nothing. The forest deceives. Snow makes everything look closer than it is, turns distance into something unstable. A tree 50 yards away might as well be 5. Everything is white on white, shapes bleeding into other shapes. Brennan has learned to distrust his eyes, to rely instead on sound, on instinct, on the animal awareness that wakes you a second before something terrible happens. He checks his rifle again. The M1 Garand has served him well, never jammed, never failed, but in this cold metal becomes something else. It burns to touch with bare skin. He has seen men lose skin to their weapons, flesh tearing away when they grabbed a barrel too quickly. Everything here wants to hurt you. The cold, the Germans, the terrain, even your own equipment. The ring turns on his finger. It occurs to him that if he dies here, someone will have to remove it. Send it back to Catherine along with the form letter, the notification, the bureaucratic acknowledgement that he existed and then stopped existing. The thought is unbearable and also strangely common. Everyone thinks this way. Death is not abstract when you can see your breath freeze in the air. What they had been told about the Germans before deployment was clear, precise, delivered with the certainty that comes from propaganda well crafted. The enemy is fanatical, they were told. Trained from childhood to follow orders without question, to fight without mercy, to die before surrendering. They worship Hitler like a god. They execute prisoners. They burn villages. They are not like us. And some of this is true. Brennan has seen enough to know that war makes monsters of men, that the Wehrmacht soldiers he has encountered fight with a desperation that borders on madness. But he has also noticed small things. The German soldiers carry photographs too. Letters. They wear wedding rings. When they die, they bleed the same red. There is a contradiction here that no one discusses. The enemy is human and inhuman at once, deserving of death yet pitiable in death, monstrous in conception but ordinary in flesh. Brennan does not have the language to articulate this, but he feels it every time he sees a German body in the snow, limbs twisted at wrong angles, face frozen in the moment before impact. They could be us, he thinks. We could be them. The foxhole smells of damp wool, of unwashed bodies, of the metallic tang that comes from fear prolonged beyond endurance. They have been told to hold this position at all costs. The phrase, at all costs, has become meaningless through repetition, but its weight remains. It means die here if necessary. It means do not retreat. It means the forest is all there is, and all there will ever be. Brennan's sergeant is a man named Kowalski, a Polish immigrant with a face like carved stone and eyes that never seem to blink. Kowalski fought in North Africa, Sicily, France, and now here. He carries himself with the exhausted competence of someone who has survived too much to believe in luck. Yesterday, Kowalski had told them to check their ammunition, conserve their grenades, eat their rations slowly. Then he had added, almost as an afterthought, if you pray, pray now. The instruction had been delivered without emotion, but Brennan had heard what lay beneath it. Kowalski knows something. Everyone knows something. The Germans are massing. Intelligence reports speak of troop movements, of armor gathering in the east, of something large being prepared. But intelligence reports have been wrong before, and even when they are right, knowing does not change the cold or the fear or the way time moves differently in a foxhole. Brennan touches the ring again. Catherine had placed it on his finger in a church in Cedar Rapids on a Saturday afternoon in May, when the world was green and warm and infinite. She had cried, but they were good tears, tears of joy or relief or some emotion he had no name for. Her hands had trembled slightly as she slid the gold band onto his finger, and he had thought then that he had never loved anything as much as he loved her in that moment. Now, in the snow, that memory feels like it belongs to someone else. Some other Michael Brennan who lived in a world where churches existed and Saturdays were for weddings and tears meant joy. That man is gone. This man, this one in the frozen foxhole with black fingers and a rifle that barely works, this man is something new. Something war has made.